If you grew up around Lincoln, or even just spent enough time poking around its back roads, chances are you've heard of someone mention Kilaga Springs. Usually this comes at something like this. Oh yeah, Kilaga Springs, that was some kind of healing water place, right? And then the conversation just sort of trails off because no one quite sure what's, legend, what's marketing fluff, and what's actually true. So let's pull up a chair, get yourself something refreshing, for external use only, of course, and walk through the story. Not as a spooky mystery, but as another uniquely Lincoln strange story. Kilaga Springs sat about 6 miles northeast of Old Town Lincoln, tucked into the rolling hills that were already old and well worked by the time automobiles came along. By the early 1900s, this era had seen gold mines, copper mines, ranchers, speculators, dreamers, people absolutely convinced that this time the mine was going to pay. In other words, classic Placer County. Long before it became a spa, the land had, been dug up, renamed, sold, renamed again, dug up again, some more. By the time Kilaga Springs opened in 1923, the ground beneath it had already been, lived several lifetimes. When Kilaga Springs officially opened as a spa in 1923, the announcement ran in the News Messenger on November 29th. And, oh boy, did it come with a story. Not just an explanation, a legend. According to the paper, long before settlers arrived, the chief of the hills, knew of a magical healing spring called Kilaga. He bathed in it, he washed wounds in it, he cured all his ailments, and it soothed the skin, diseases, and basically it was like nature's walking clinic. Then, as these stories always go, the white men showed up and laughed at the idea, tore up the land and looking for gold, and forgot all about the miracle water. Until one day. A mine superintendent cut his hand on barbed wire, and lo and behold, after washing it in the spring, the wound healed super quick. Experiments followed, 3 full years of testing supposedly. Skin diseases vanishing, nature delivered an unfailing remedy. And so a group of well-known men decided to bring Kilaga to the world. It's a great story. It also, it didn't happen like that. What about that Chief Nissen fellow, right? Let's gently set the record straight without being a total Karen, Oh, no offense to my non-Karen friends named Karen out there. Anyways, the article refers to a man named Chief Nissen who allegedly passed this knowledge through generations. Here's the thing. There absolutely were Nissen people living around the region. Some spelled it Nishinin in the early records. And they were real, right? They were a documented native group. But there's no evidence that an individual named Chief Nissen ever existed. In fact, the name appears to be a convenient personification of the tribe itself. So a way to add, authority, mystery, and a little exotic flavor to the sales pitch. Was the water known before 1923? Well, very possibly. Was there a single chief named Nishinin telling investors bedtime stories about miracle cures? Almost certainly not. But in fairness to the, marketers at the time, everyone was doing this. I mean, if you're selling mineral water in the 1920s and it didn't include noble indigenous legend, you're practically leaving money on the table. So, what was there before the spa, right? A lot. And this is where things get genuinely interesting. Mining began on this site in the early 1850s when Placer County was still vibrating with gold rush energy. Over the decades, the property went, by a parade of names, Baker and Crosby Mine, Whiskey Diggins, which tells you everything you need to know, Baker's Ranch, Harpending, I think it was, mined, Banker mined, Valley View mined, California Copper Company, Hillings mined, Western Consolidated, Landis and Gaylord, right? This isn't one mine. It was a series of hopeful renovations. And yes, mineral water did flow from some of these some of their workings. And that part is true, right? Mines often hit mineral-rich groundwater and folks noticed it when it smelled funny, tasted odd, or left a weird residue. That doesn't mean it cured everything, right? But it did mean that it was interesting. So now let's talk about the group of well-known men who actually launched the Kilaga Springs venture, because they're real, and one of them is very familiar to Lincoln's history, right? First is John Landis. He was a judge of Placer County, and yes, it's the same Landis family whose tragedy we've covered before in a different episode. So Judge Landis was the father of Frank Landis, whose 1899 death rocked Lincoln and left behind more questions than answers. By the late 1910s and early 1920s, Judge Landis was no longer a young man chasing a fortune, right? He was a civic leader looking for stable investments. Kilaga Springs probably wasn't some wild scheme for him, right? So next up, E.M. Kimberlin, right? Kimberlin bought capital and business experience, okay? So he wasn't local, but he wasn't reckless either. He was the kind of man you brought in when you wanted legitimacy and possibly distribution connections beyond Placer County. If Landis was credibility, Kimberlin was money. So finally, there was Edwin Gaylord, right? Gaylord had served as a state assemblyman representing Placer and El Dorado counties. He was known locally, politically connected, and deeply invested in Lincoln's future. Some say maybe too deeply. Three men formed a tidy little triangle. Landis, law and respect; Kimberlin, business and capital; Gaylord, political influence. And together they believed Kilaga Springs could be something, lucrative. So here's one of my favorite parts of the story, just because it's so slimy and strange, right? So Kilaga sounds ancient, mystical, indigenous, right? It's none of those things. It's simply the first two letters of three names. K.I. Kimberlin, L.A. Landis, G.A. Gaylord. That's it. No ceremony, no legend, just three businessmen, nodding, saying, yeah, Kilaga sounds like money. Personally, I think it shows a little lack of character, but hey. So let's talk about building the dream. So Kilaga Springs officially opened as a spa in 1923. The site included a bathhouse, guest cottages, bottling plant, landscaped grounds. People could come and soak in the mineral water, relax, and tell their friends they were taking the waters, which was a very classy thing to say in the 1920s. You could also buy bottled Kilaga water at drugstores, clearly labeled for external use only. So, which probably saved a lot of trouble later because it didn't do anything. Business was good enough to keep things running. In 1928, the operation reorganized under a new name, the Kilaga Company. By 1930, bottles were being shipped all over California and Arizona, especially to doctors, dentists, and hospitals. This wasn't snake oil, right? Or at least that wasn't the way it was being sold. This was a white coat approved mineral water. To really understand Kilaga Springs, it helps to picture what an actual visit might have felt like, right? So because this wasn't some high pressure medical facility or spooky sanatorium, it was pleasant, right? You'd ride by car, probably dusty, probably warm, after winding through the same hills that, had already exhausted generations of miners. Instead of hard hats and stamp mills, you'd find neat little cottages, a bathhouse, and grounds that felt intentionally calm. So, in fact, most historians point to 1910 when Elizabeth Arden opened, her Red Door salon, in New York City as the very first modern-day spa in history. So to have that quaint little, Lincoln, it was kind of a big deal, right? So think about, what it was like back then. It wasn't like you could pop up a whole apartment complex overnight like they do now, okay? If we anchor the first modern day spa to 1910, right, then Kilaga Springs opening as a health and wellness destination by 1919 puts it shockingly close to the leading edge of that movement. So this was not some watered down knockoff, trend of arriving late. I mean, this was Lincoln outpacing the national curve on an incredible degree. People were traveling out into the hills specifically for rest, health, mineral water, and wellness. This wasn't about excitement. It wasn't about slowing down. You'd check in, maybe exchange a few pleasantries with staff who absolutely believed in what they were doing. And then you'd bathe in warm mineral water that smelled just different enough to feel important. Not bad, not sulfur strong, just distinctive, right? So people soaked, people chatted quietly, people compared notes on the aches they felt a little bit better afterwards. And whether it worked or not almost didn't matter at all because the experience itself felt restorative. And in the 1920s, that counted for a lot, right? Then there was the bottled water, which might be the most very 1920s part of this whole story. So Kilaga water was sold in drugstores, shipped to hospitals, dentists, and doctors across California and Arizona, and packaged with just enough medical seriousness to inspire confidence. The labels were careful, the wording was optimistic but restrained, and that all-important phrase appeared clearly, for external use only. That line alone tells you something important, right? The owners weren't reckless. They weren't claiming miracles in a court of law, sort of way. Even though one of them was actually judged. But they were, walking that fine line between hope and recklessness, which frankly, a lot of companies didn't even bother doing at the time. So I guess that's good. This was marked as something that helped, not something that replaced doctors. And that's probably why doctors were willing to stock it. Kilaga Springs didn't appear out of nowhere. It showed up exactly the moment Lincoln was trying to decide what it wanted to be next. By the 1920s, Lincoln was no longer a rough mining town, but it wasn't fully modern either. The clay industry was growing, agriculture was steady, railroads had reshaped the region. People here were done betting everything on holes in the ground, right? They wanted something cleaner, something calmer, something that didn't involve explosions. So Kilaga Springs fit that mood perfectly. It said, we're past the chaos, we're building something refined now. And for about 15 years, that version, worked well enough to keep the doors open. Kilaga Springs wasn't a playground for the ultra wealthy, right? It wasn't a celebrity resort. It was more earnest than that, right? Visitors were often middle-class Californians, professionals sent by doctors, folks with chronic skin issues, people who just wanted to try something new. And locals absolutely knew about it. Even if they never went, they talked about it the same way people would talk about a place that feels a little special, but also a little odd. Yeah, it's out there, supposed to be good for you, nice people. So that kind of reputation doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen by accident either. So, one of the quite interesting things about Kilaga Springs is that it wasn't, the first reinvention of that land, and it wouldn't be the last. This probably had already been, this property had already been gold country, copper country, ranch land, speculative land, near abandoned land. Kilaga Spring was simply, the most optimistic version of that cycle. Instead of asking what can we pull out of the ground, it asked what can we offer people instead. That's a subtle shift, but an important one, right? And maybe that's why the story still sticks. Unfortunately, Kilaga Springs had, a recurring enemy, and that was fire. In 1924, a fire destroyed the main building and bottling plant. They rebuilt. In 1938, another fire destroyed the main house again. This time, things didn't bounce back as easily. The Great Depression had just taken its toll. Luxury spas were not exactly booming in the late 1930s, no matter how magical the water, right? The baths continued operating for a little bit, but the momentum was kind of gone at that point. The final chapter, came in February of 1940. Edwin Gaylord was found dead in one of the cottages on the property. With that, Kilaga Springs effectively closed its doors. The land sat mostly abandoned after that, another hopeful Placer County dream slowly returning to silence. Eventually, the property passed to a landless descendant. When he died, he left it to his personal caretaker, right, Josephine Lint, who lived in the Monterey Bay area. So years later, she granted permission for the name to be used by Sun City Lincoln Hills for Kilaga Springs Lodge and the Kilaga Cafe. a quiet nod to a very optimistic chapter in local history. Today, this is private property, so you best not attempt to visit without permission. Going out there on property and doing that is very dangerous. People don't expect you. So, Kilaga Springs only operated for about 15 years, but the idea of it, lasted much longer. So people remembered the name, the water, the bottles, the feeling that it was good for you. And when the spa closed, the story didn't disappear, it just softened. It became something people mentioned in passing, something parents told their kids about, something that sounded slightly mysterious without ever being spooky. That's actually a pretty rare outcome. Most failed ventures vanished completely, and Kilaga didn't. So what is Kilaga Springs really about, right? Not magic, not mystery, not ghosts. Kilaga Springs is about hope. And it's about the moment when people believed that, nature could heal, progress was inevitable, Lincoln was growing into something bigger, and a good story could carry business a long way. And honestly, they weren't entirely wrong. So the real legacy, right? Kilaga Springs didn't cure every ailment, but it did something else. It captured the spirit, of its time. And a time when Placer County was done digging holes and ready to build something gentler, something welcoming, something clean. And even though the spa is gone, the story stuck. And, and around here, that counts for a lot. So, all right, before we all run off to soak our elbows in a mystery spring and start telling our friends we're taking off to the waters, let's do a quick little legend versus reality check, right? No gotchas, no scolding, just a friendly sorting of fact from the enthusiastic storytelling. So, legend, right? An ancient Native American healer discovered a magical spring called Kilaga that cured all manner of diseases, right? The reality is there were there were native people here, specifically the Nisenan, who lived throughout the region, long before Lincoln existed. But the story about a chief called Chief Nisenan, passing down secret healing knowledge for generations, that part almost certainly was invented for marketing purposes. So that doesn't mean locals didn't notice the water was different. Mineral springs were often recognized for their unusual qualities. But, the dramatic origin story, that's early 1900s advertising do what it did best, right? So the verdict on that is it's inspired by real people and heavily seasoned for sales. It's just kind of one of those neat things, right? So Kilaga Springs doesn't need magic to be interesting. It's, what it leads to that's so interesting. The Landis family had a judge, a coroner, a politician, a county clerk, a money guru, a son who was mysteriously murdered downtown, and the only local known coal miners in Lincoln. So, and kiln needs something to burn, to make that clay that Gladdy McBean bought. So, just seems a little weird. Worth looking more into. So, before we wrap up, I want to give a huge shout out to the Lincoln Area Archives Museum. These incredible folks keep our town's history alive. Every map, every newspaper clipping, every folder packed with stories just like this one. If you've never been in, you're missing out. Thanks for watching another Strange Stories of Lincoln. Keep your eye out for the next episode. If you like this one, share it on YouTube with somebody who cares about our town or simply likes storytelling. As always, I'm Mike Crossfield, a local business owner trying to build a better Lincoln together. Thank you. Good night.